Hello everyone, I'm very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
She laughed. Right in my face. Over a dead woman's ring. And I don't mean a polite, awkward, grieving sort of chuckle that slips out because you're tired or stressed or trying not to cry. I mean full-on, smug, teeth showing, shoulder-shaking laughter, like I had just made the dumbest joke she'd ever heard, and she couldn't even be bothered to pretend otherwise. It happened 2 days after we buried Grandma Jo, standing in the stale-smelling dining room of her old house, the one with the floral wallpaper peeling off in corners and the fake fruit bowl that had been dusty since the Clinton administration. My sister Rachel leaned against the sideboard like she owned the place, arms folded, smirk loaded and ready. I was holding the little wooden jewelry box, the one Grandma used to keep in the back of her sock drawer, wrapped in an old pair of pantyhose. I'd found it when I came by to pick up a few framed photos for the memorial table. I hadn't been digging. It was just there. Inside that box, nestled in a tangle of costume brooches and tarnished chains, was the ring. A single emerald, deep green like pine needles in winter, set in a simple gold band. I'd seen it 1,000 times on Grandma's finger, always on her right hand, never taken off. She used to twist it when she was thinking or worried, like it helped her anchor herself in the moment. She never talked much about it. Just once told me, "This was my mother's before it was mine, and it'll be yours one day, sweet pea. But don't let that make you greedy." So when I found it, I didn't feel proud or rich or victorious. I felt something closer to dread. I knew what it meant. I knew exactly what it would start. I thought maybe, I said quietly, still holding the box in both hands like it might bite me, we could figure out something fair. You know, maybe split Grandma's jewelry. Or rotate pieces. I mean, this ring, maybe we could share it. That was when she laughed. It came out of her sharp and cold, like the snap of a mousetrap. She turned toward me, still smiling, and said, "Are you serious right now?" That ring was always going to me. Grandma told me that years ago. Ask Mom. It's not even a question. There's a moment when someone tells you something completely insane with complete confidence, that your brain stutters a little. Like it can't quite compute the arrogance. That was me. Just standing there, mouth a little open, trying to figure out if I'd missed something huge, or if she was just full of it like always. I looked over at our mother, who was sipping cold coffee out of a cracked mug that still said "World's Best Grandma" in faded letters. She didn't meet my eyes. Just shrugged and muttered something about not getting involved in girl drama. Classic Evelyn. Rachel walked over and plucked the ring out of the box like it was already hers. She held it up to the light, admired it with a satisfied hum, then slid it onto her finger. Wrong finger, wrong hand, wrong energy entirely. She wasn't thinking about Grandma. She was thinking about winning. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab her by the shoulders and shake her and say, "You weren't even there. You barely visited." I was the one who took her to her appointments, who fixed her TV when it broke, who sat with her in the hospital when she forgot my name for the first time. But I didn't, because I knew how it would go. Rachel would roll her eyes, make some snide remark about martyr complexes, accuse me of being dramatic. And Mom would sit there like a statue, pretending not to notice the house was on fire. So I didn't argue. I just nodded slowly, let her smirk burn itself into my memory, and I walked out of that house like I hadn't just watched a lifetime of love get stolen in real time. But here's what Rachel didn't know. What neither of them knew, actually. The day after Grandma died, while the rest of the family was arguing over what food to serve at the reception, I'd driven down to Mr. Holbrook's office, the lawyer Grandma used for years. He'd greeted me like an old friend and told me there was, in fact, an updated will on file. One Grandma had signed just 6 months ago. One that hadn't been opened yet because no one had scheduled a formal reading. I had. I picked the day and time and told him to call everyone. "I just want things clear," I told him. "Fair." He'd nodded, not saying much, but I saw the faint twitch of a smile. Rachel thought I'd just back down like always. Keep the peace. Swallow my feelings. Play nice like the good little sister. But not this time. This time, I had something stronger than guilt or memory. This time, I had Grandma's words. In ink. In her own hand. And I couldn't wait to see the look on Rachel's face when she realized the ring she was so proud to wear might just be slipping off her finger a whole lot sooner than she thought. It wasn't just the ring, not really, not even close. That moment in the dining room was just the tip of something older, something deeper, like spotting a rusted nail poking out of a floorboard and realizing the whole damn house is rotting underneath. Because Rachel always got the bigger piece. Of everything. It started so early that I can't even remember when it felt normal, but I do remember how it felt when I started noticing it wasn't. Birthdays were the easiest place to see it. Every year, Rachel got the cake with her name in thick, swirling icing, buttercream flowers in her favorite colors, and a pile of gifts tall enough to lean against. One year, she got a mountain bike she rode exactly 3 times before she forgot about it. That same year, I got a handmade card and a sweater that still smelled like mothballs. I never said anything I'd been taught not to, but even as a kid, I understood that Rachel shined brighter in my mother's eyes, and apparently, that meant she deserved more. Christmas was worse. The tree would be lit up like a department store, and while I tried not to count, I always knew. Rachel got the name brand stuff, the real perfume, the expensive boots, the pretty little necklace with her birthstone in it. I got practical things. Socks. A calendar. Once, a geometry workbook. Because you're so smart, my mother had said, as if that made it feel any less like an afterthought. I remember clutching that workbook in my lap, trying to smile through it, and watching Rachel twirl her necklace like she was in a commercial, glowing with a kind of effortless joy that I've never managed to fake. But the worst part wasn't the gifts. The worst part was the way it trained me to expect less. It taught me that when I didn't get picked, when I didn't get praised, when my name got forgotten on the school sign or my recital got skipped for a PTA meeting, that was just life doing what it always did. Handing Rachel the crown and giving me a polite applause from the back row. Grandma Jo, though, she was different. Not perfect, but different. She didn't play favorites the way my mother did. She listened when I talked, even if it was about boring things like books or dreams that didn't involve marriage or money. She never interrupted, never told me I was too sensitive, never made me feel like I had to earn her attention. Rachel didn't spend much time with her. Said it was boring or depressing or smelled like old people. I still remember the first time I heard her say that at Thanksgiving, Grandma had barely stepped into the kitchen before Rachel was rolling her eyes behind her back. But I kept showing up. Every Saturday. Rain, snow, college finals, breakups, none of it stopped me. I'd come over, help her with groceries, sit with her on the porch and drink that bitter tea she liked. We didn't talk big talk. It was small, quiet things. But they were ours. And that's why the ring mattered. Not because it was emerald or gold or old or valuable, but because it meant something to her. She wore it even when her fingers were swollen with arthritis, even when her memory started slipping, even when she barely recognized my face. That ring was always on her hand. She'd touch it when she was scared or sad, and once, just once, she touched mine and said, "I want you to have it one day. You'll understand why when I'm not here." I didn't know what she meant then. I wasn't sure I wanted to, but I never forgot it. Rachel never knew that moment happened. And even if I told her now, she'd probably laugh again, call it a made-up memory, say Grandma was senile or confused or just saying things to make me feel better. That's the thing about people like Rachel. They rewrite the past with such confidence that everyone starts to believe their version is the truth. Even you. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd spoken up more as a kid. If I'd thrown tantrums like she did, demanded fairness, cried louder, asked for more. Would I have gotten the necklace? The bike? The ring? Or would it have just made them resent me more? It's hard to say, and honestly, I'm too old to play the what-if game for long. But that doesn't mean I don't still feel it. And maybe that's why this time felt different. Maybe that's why I didn't walk away when Rachel laughed, why I didn't just let it go like all the other times. Because for once in my life, I had something that couldn't be dismissed or talked over or shrugged off. I had Grandma's words, Grandma's intention, and maybe, just maybe, I had the truth on my side. Did you ever feel like someone rewrote the rules of fairness just for your family? Like your memories meant less just because you didn't shout about them? I keep thinking about the way Grandma looked that last summer, when the light hit her face just right and the wind rustled her porch curtains. She'd looked at me with this tired softness, like she was trying to say something without saying it. And now I think I finally remember what it was. It wasn't just a promise about the ring, it was a warning. About what would come after. About how people will try to steal even your memories if they think it gets them something shiny. And it's not over. Not even close. Because Rachel doesn't know what Grandma wrote. Not yet. But she's about to. It was late July, the kind of evening where the heat doesn't ease up even after the sun slips below the trees and everything feels suspended in the sleepy, golden quiet, the sort of summer dusk where nothing dramatic happens unless you're paying attention. I was 17 then, still all elbows and self-doubt, stretched out on Grandma Jo's porch swing, one bare foot pushing us slowly back and forth while the cicadas screamed like they were racing each other to the end of the world. She was sitting beside me, her thin fingers wrapped around a chipped teacup filled with what she always claimed was Earl Grey, though I was pretty sure it was mostly sugar and hot water by that point. Her other hand, the right one, twisted that old emerald ring around her knuckle the way she always did when her thoughts started to drift. We'd been quiet for a while, just watching the porch light buzz with insects and the sky shift colors like water running over oil, when she suddenly said, Katie Bug, people always think things are about what they're worth. She looked down at her hand then, holding it out in front of her like she was offering it to the night air. Gold, stones, old stories, people assume it's the price tag that makes something matter. But this... She held the ring up, and for a second it caught the porch light just right, glowing green like something alive. This isn't about the gold. Never was. It's about the person who sees me. I didn't say anything at first because I didn't understand. Not really. I was 17, full of theories and half-grown opinions, too tangled up in trying to be liked and useful and invisible all at once. But something about the way she said it stuck deep, like a splinter I'd never quite get out. The person who sees me. Back then, I thought maybe she meant a future husband, or God, or someone from her past. I didn't realize she was talking about me. She told me once that she used to wear that ring when she'd fight with Grandpa Joe, when she'd sit alone in the backyard after he slammed the screen door, fuming about something stupid like burnt toast or missed bills. This ring reminded me who I was, she said, when I started to forget. When someone else tried to rewrite it for me. That sentence circled around in my brain every time Rachel opened her mouth and acted like Grandma was just a prop in her performance of grief. Rachel hadn't visited Grandma in over 2 years. I mean, not really visited. She came to Christmas, sure, stood in the foyer in her stiff coat and kissed the air next to Grandma's cheek before disappearing into whatever emergency required her immediate attention. Phone calls were even rarer, short, clipped things where Rachel acted like she was interviewing for a job she didn't want. But still, she told anyone who would listen that she was Grandma's favorite. She dropped it into conversations like seasoning, just enough to make herself sound important, like her absence had actually been presence if you squinted at it long enough. So when Rachel stood in the living room after the funeral, still in her heels, still wearing that perfume that smelled like ambition and hairspray, and announced to the rest of the family, "I'm just going to take the ring now, as planned," something inside me clenched so hard I could barely breathe. She said it like it was a business transaction, like we were divvying up office supplies after a layoff. No one looked surprised. Not even Mom. Especially not Mom. I watched her walk over to the little display table where I'd placed the ring, next to a photo of Grandma smiling under her wide-brimmed garden hat. Rachel didn't hesitate, just picked it up like she was reclaiming lost property, and slipped it on her finger without looking at the photo once. I wanted to scream. I wanted to knock it off her hand and say, "That doesn't belong to you," but my mouth stayed shut, jaw tight, fists clenched. I didn't want to be the one causing a scene again. But I remembered something else Grandma said that same summer on the porch. She looked at me real quiet, like she was making a deal with God, and said, "When I go, there'll be people fighting over things they never earned. Let them. But don't let them lie about who I was, and don't let them forget who you are." And maybe that's when the idea started. The ring wasn't about gold or inheritance or family heirlooms. It was about truth. About being seen. And Rachel might have taken the ring, but I had something better. I had Grandma's truth written down, locked in legal language, waiting quietly to be read aloud. That night, after everyone left, I sat in my car in the driveway for a long time, the house dark behind me, and I called Mr. Holbrook. His assistant answered, polite and tired, and transferred me. I told him I wanted to schedule the will reading. Not a phone call, not an email. In person. With everyone there. He paused, then asked if I was sure. I told him I was. Because Rachel may have slipped that ring on her finger, but she was about to find out she'd been wearing someone else's story, and that story was about to speak for itself. The waiting room at Holbrook and Denton smelled like dust and cherry-scented polish, the kind they probably used to make aging mahogany furniture look dignified instead of just old and overused. The carpet was the same gray beige you find in hospital waiting rooms and DMV lobbies, the kind that says, "We're neutral here, please don't make a scene." It was a Tuesday morning, just before 10, and already it felt like something was about to crack. Maybe it was the air conditioning that kept blowing too hard, or maybe it was the silence stretched too thin across a room full of people who hadn't really spoken to each other in years. Rachel walked in 10 minutes late, of course. She wore a black pencil skirt and a tight gray blazer, like she was heading into a shareholders' meeting, not a reading of our dead grandmother's will. Her sunglasses stayed on for a full minute after she walked through the door, and she didn't say hello to anyone. Just looked around the room with that cool, impatient smile she always wore when she thought she was about to win something. Mom followed close behind, clutching a folder like it might help her stay grounded in whatever awkwardness was about to unfold. My cousin Derek and Aunt Marie sat across from me, both of them looking like they regretted coming already, but too polite to leave. I didn't say much. I just sat still and waited, hands folded in my lap, trying to keep my breathing even. Mr. Holbrook stepped into the room like he didn't notice the tension thick enough to choke on. He was tall and soft-spoken, with that way of talking like he'd been reading legal documents since birth and still somehow enjoyed it. He nodded at each of us as if greeting strangers in an elevator and asked us to follow him to the conference room. I watched Rachel straighten her shoulders and smooth her skirt like a runway model about to hit the catwalk. She looked completely at ease, like she had the script already memorized. I wondered, not for the first time, if she'd gone so long pretending she was the favorite that she honestly believed it now. The conference room was colder than the lobby. One long polished table stretched across the space, with leather chairs tucked in too tightly. Rachel took a seat directly across from me without hesitation, and our mother slid in beside her without a word. Mr. Holbrook sat at the head of the table and placed a thick manila envelope in front of him. It was sealed with one of those official-looking stickers, gold with tiny ridges, like something out of a courtroom drama. He adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and began. He didn't start with pleasantries, didn't ask how we were doing or offer coffee. He just opened the envelope, unfolded the papers slowly, and read from the top. The last will and testament of Josephine Marie Winslow. The room stayed still. Rachel leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, mouth slightly smirking like she could already see the final tally and had been rehearsing her thank you speech in the mirror that morning. Then Mr. Holbrook paused. Just for a moment. And when he spoke again, The words came out smooth, but sharp, like a scalpel in the hands of someone who knew exactly where to cut. To my granddaughter who actually visited me. Just that. 7 words, said in a room full of family pretending to be strangers. You could feel the air shift, like someone had knocked all the oxygen out of the place. My heart kicked up like a drum in my chest, and across the table, I saw it, the first crack in Rachel's armor. Her smirk faltered, just barely, but enough. Enough to make me sit up a little straighter. Enough to make Aunt Marie glance at her shoes like she wanted to disappear. To my granddaughter who actually visited me, Mr. Holbrook repeated, like he wanted to make sure we all heard it the first time. I leave the ring that once belonged to my mother, and later to me, a symbol of loyalty, of kindness, and of seeing someone for who they really are, even when no one else does. Rachel shifted in her chair. Not dramatically, just enough for the leather to creak beneath her, but it was the loudest sound in the room. I have made this decision not out of spite, Holbrook continued, still reading, but out of love. Because this ring is not just jewelry. It is a piece of me. And it belongs to the one who saw me through my last years, not out of obligation or guilt, but out of real care. And to that granddaughter, I say, I saw you too. The room went still again. You could hear the soft tick of the wall clock above the door and the low hum of the building's ancient air system. Rachel looked stunned, like someone had slapped her without touching her, and our mother's eyes dropped to the table like she suddenly remembered something very far away. And then, without saying a word, Mr. Holbrook reached down, opened a drawer beneath the table, and pulled out a small velvet box, the same box I'd seen Rachel grab so confidently from the display table just days before. Except this one wasn't empty. This one still held the ring. And then he slid the velvet box across the table, right to me. When the velvet box touched the table in front of me, the sound it made was softer than a whisper, but somehow felt louder than a slammed door. It landed like a verdict, like the end of a long and crooked trial that no one ever admitted was happening, and for a moment, no one in the room moved. Even the air felt like it had been holding its breath, waiting to see who would speak first, who would try to break the silence that had grown so thick and so bitter it could have been cut with a butter knife. Rachel didn't reach for the box. Not this time. She sat perfectly still, spine straight as a fence post, one manicured hand resting on the table, the other gripping the edge of her chair like she was holding herself together by sheer will. Her lips were pressed into a thin, pale line, and her eyes flicked between the box and the lawyer like she was still hoping this was all some kind of mistake or cruel joke that could be walked back with a well-placed complaint. Mom cleared her throat then once, loud enough to be heard, but not loud enough to mean anything. It was the kind of noise she made when she wanted to say something but didn't have the nerve to say it, a sound that meant, let's all just move on, even when moving on was the last thing anybody in the room wanted to do. She didn't look at me, and she sure as hell didn't look at Rachel. She just stared down at the paperwork like it might explain how we'd gotten here. I didn't touch the box either, not yet. I kept my hands folded in my lap like I was waiting for permission that I didn't need and didn't really want. Because the truth was, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated or proud or powerful. I felt like a window had just been blown open in the middle of a snowstorm, and everything warm and familiar had been swept away, replaced by a cold truth that made my stomach twist. I hadn't expected to feel so heavy. I'd thought this moment would come with a kind of release, some kind of righteous relief, but instead it just felt hollow. Mr. Holbrook didn't smile, didn't shift in his seat, didn't do anything except keep reading. The rest of the estate, he said, glancing over his glasses, is to be divided according to the attached appendix, which includes savings, property, and personal effects. Specific items were listed by the decedent in handwriting, as dated and signed. His voice was steady, like the ticking of a metronome, but I could feel the edges of the room fraying with tension. Rachel finally spoke, her voice low and dangerously smooth. That's not what she told me, she said, staring straight ahead, not at me, not even at the lawyer. She said it was mine. She told me when I was 16. That ring. That was always supposed to be mine. And there it was, the ghost of entitlement rising from the grave, wearing a teenage smirk and the perfume of certainty. She sounded so sure of herself, like this whole thing had been a robbery instead of a reckoning. Like the truth didn't matter, only the version she'd been rehearsing for 2 decades. I saw Mom shift uncomfortably, her fingers tightening around the folder like she was gripping some invisible leash, and I realized in that moment that she wasn't going to say anything. Not for me. Not for Rachel. Not for anyone. Mr. Holbrook didn't flinch. He flipped another page, checked a note, and looked directly at Rachel. The original will, which you're referring to, was replaced 6 months ago. This one is fully notarized, witnessed, and compliant with state law. Your grandmother was in full mental capacity at the time of signing. He said it like he'd said it before, probably to other families just like ours, ones that cracked open under the pressure of inheritance like eggs on pavement. That's when it hit me Rachel had known about the original will. Of course she had. Grandma had probably told her years ago, back when Rachel was still playing the favorite and collecting promises like souvenirs. But she'd never told me. Not once. Not even when Grandma got sick. Not even when we knew the end was coming. She'd held that little fact close to her chest, like a winning hand in a game only she knew was being played. And now she looked like she might explode. "This isn't fair," she hissed, barely keeping her voice in check. She must have been confused. You know she was having memory issues. You said it yourself. She remembered who showed up. I said before I could stop myself, my voice steadier than I expected. She remembered who was there. Rachel stood up so fast her chair made a sharp screech against the floor. Her face flushed, her jaw clenched, and for a second, I thought she was going to lunge across the table. But she didn't. She just glared at me, then turned on her heel and stormed out of the room without another word, heels clicking like gunshots in the hallway. The silence that followed was thick and ugly. No one said a thing. Aunt Marie looked like she might cry, or scream, or both. Derek rubbed his temples like he'd suddenly aged 5 years. I finally reached out and touched the velvet box, not to open it, not yet, but just to feel its weight. It was heavier than I expected, like it held more than metal and memory. And that's when I realized something I hadn't thought about until that moment. What if the ring wasn't the only thing inside? I took a slow breath, looked up at Mr. Holbrook, and asked him, was there anything else? He nodded once and slid a second envelope across the table. Your grandmother left a note, he said quietly. For you. And just like that, the room changed again. My fingers hovered over the velvet lid like it might burn me, and honestly, for a second, I wasn't sure it wouldn't. After everything that had just happened, the smirk, the silence, the way Rachel had bolted from the room like someone had yanked the ground out from beneath her, I wasn't ready for another moment that could split me open. But then I thought of Grandma's voice, the way it had sounded in that last year, smaller, but still sharp, and I let myself breathe in slowly before I opened the box. The ring was there, of course, resting neatly in the middle like it had been waiting for this moment its whole life. But tucked underneath it, folded in half with careful hands and bound with a thin pink ribbon, was a letter. Not typed. Not official. Not notarized. Just ink and paper and a name scrawled across the front in curling blue cursive, mine. Katie, it said. Not Kate. Not Catherine. Just the name she always used, soft like sunlight and never once said in anger. I picked up the letter with both hands, not ready to open it yet. I could feel eyes on me, Aunt Marie, wide-eyed and silent, Derek, blinking slowly like maybe he was trying to disappear, and Mom, who still couldn't meet my gaze. Mr. Holbrook gave me the smallest nod, barely a tilt of his chin, and I took that as permission. I untied the ribbon, slid the paper open, and let her voice rise up through the words like she was right there beside me again on that porch swing, holding her teacup and watching the wind move the trees. My dearest Katie, it began. If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and that's something I've made my peace with. But I know you. I know you'll be feeling everything too deeply, grief, confusion, guilt, maybe even anger, and I need to say a few things before you carry those feelings too far. You were the one who showed up. Over and over again. Not because anyone asked you to, and not because it was convenient, but because you have the kind of heart that doesn't know how to pretend not to care. I noticed every visit, every cup of tea you made me, every time you sat beside me without needing to fill the silence. You saw me. Not just the frail old woman everyone else politely avoided, but me, the full version. And I saw you too. I stopped reading then. Not because I didn't want to continue, but because the words started to blur through the hot sting in my eyes, and my hands began to shake in a way I couldn't control. The room around me softened, like it had slipped behind a curtain, and all I could feel was the pressure building behind my ribs. I felt the weight of years in those sentences, years I had spent doubting whether she knew what I did for her, whether any of it had meant something beyond habit. And here it was. All of it. Written down in a shaky but familiar hand. I kept reading. Rachel lost her way, the letter continued. I don't say that to hurt her, but to be honest about what happened. She wanted things I couldn't give her, and in her search for more, she walked away from what mattered. I tried to forgive her. I truly did. But every holiday missed, every phone call unanswered, chipped away at something I couldn't glue back together. In the end, it wasn't about anger. It was about knowing who would be there when I needed someone and knowing who never would. There's no point in pretending everyone gets what they deserve in this life. They don't. But I needed to leave something behind that said I saw you. That your kindness mattered. That your love wasn't unnoticed or wasted. I've left the ring to you, yes. But more than that, I've left my memory in your care. Don't let it get rewritten. Don't let it become something clean and shiny that only exists for photos and toasts. You were my family in the end. The only one who really stayed. I love you, my Katie. Always have. Always will. Grandma, Joe, I didn't cry. Not at first. Not right away. It was too big for tears. Instead, it came out like a breath that wouldn't end. A slow, unraveling exhale that took everything with it. Anger, confusion, years of trying to explain things to people who never listened. And in its place was something quieter. Not peace exactly, but something close to it. The scrape of a chair jolted me back. Rachel was standing in the doorway again, as if she'd never left, though her face was red and her eyes wild with something between fury and disbelief. She stepped toward me, then toward the letter, her hand outstretched like she had some right to it, like the paper itself had betrayed her by existing. I want to read it, she said, voice trembling. No, Mr. Holbrook said before I even had to respond. That was left personally. Privately. It's not part of the estate. Rachel's mouth opened and closed like she was searching for an argument that wouldn't come. I saw something flicker in her eyes then. Not just rage, but panic. Maybe for the first time, she realized this wasn't just about stuff, not about possessions or titles or who looked better in front of a crowd. This was about legacy. This was about being known. And she had been left out. She turned and left again, slamming the door behind her hard enough to make the windows rattle. No one followed her this time. I sat there holding the letter, and the ring still in its box, and I thought that maybe this was the end of the story. But it wasn't. Because 2 days later, I opened my mailbox and found a second letter, addressed in the same handwriting, but postmarked a week earlier, like Grandma had known all along what might come next. And that one changed everything. The envelope was thinner than the last one. No ribbon this time, no grand presentation, just a pale cream paper tucked inside one of those plain business envelopes with my name written in Grandma's unmistakable hand, looping. Patient cursive that always made me think of someone writing carefully in church, like each letter might be judged by something higher. It was postmarked 6 days before she died, and the return address was hers, though I knew she hadn't sent it herself. Probably handed it to the nurse and asked that it be mailed later, or maybe even left it with Mr. Holbrook with instructions. Either way, it had come to me now, not in a meeting room with eyes on me, but here at my kitchen table with the afternoon sun bleeding through the blinds and the ring still sitting untouched in its velvet box just a few feet away. This time, I didn't wait. I broke the seal, unfolded the letter with slow fingers, and began to read even before I'd taken a full breath. The first lines were soft again, more personal, but there was no warm-up, no storytelling. Grandma didn't ease me in like she had with the first. She went straight for the truth. Katie, I lied to you. And I need you to know why. My heart stopped for just a second there, a cold flash of something sharp slicing through the quiet in the room. I read on, each word heavy, the kind of heavy that makes your chest feel like it's trying to sink into your spine. Years ago, 8, maybe 9, your sister came to me in the middle of the night, crying. I hadn't seen her in months. She said she'd made some mistakes, that she was drowning, that she needed help. I believed her, or I wanted to, which maybe is the same thing when you're old and tired and clinging to hope like a lifeline. She asked for money. A lot of it. More than I could afford. But I gave it to her anyway. Told her it was a loan. She promised she'd pay it back within a year. I waited a year. Nothing came. I asked once, gently, and she said she was working on it. The next time I asked, she stopped calling. Eventually, she just stopped coming. I told people she was busy. I told you she was working hard. But the truth was, she took what she needed and left. And I let her. I lied because I was ashamed. I lied because I didn't want you to think she was a monster. Because even after everything, part of me still wanted to believe she'd come back. That she'd knock on my door, hand me an envelope full of money, and say she was sorry. That she'd sit down and have tea with me like you did every week. But she didn't. What hurt most wasn't the money. It was that she didn't even pretend to make it right. That she looked me in the eye and promised something, then disappeared like the promise was disposable. I forgave her, but not because she asked. I forgave her because I didn't want to die angry, but I never forgot. So why am I telling you this now? Because I see something in you. Something she lost a long time ago. Not just kindness or loyalty, but courage. The kind of courage it takes to tell the truth even when it hurts. And I want you to know that what you did, coming to see me, caring, staying when it would have been easier to leave, meant more to me than any check ever could have. But I also want you to know that if she ever does come back, if she tries to tell you I was cruel or cold, or that I cut her out without reason, you have the truth now. You have the whole picture. Do what you want with it. You don't owe her silence. You don't owe her anything. But you, my Katie, you deserve to know. Grandma, I sat there for a long time after that, the letter trembling slightly in my hand, the refrigerator humming behind me like background noise to a life that suddenly didn't feel like mine. It wasn't that I hadn't suspected something like this. Rachel had always had a knack for treating people like vending machines. Press the right buttons, get what you want, walk away. But seeing it in writing, knowing Grandma had carried that betrayal quietly for years while still smiling in family photos and signing birthday cards with love, it hit differently. It cracked something open inside me, something that felt a lot like fury, but even more like grief. Because it wasn't just about money. It was about abandonment. About how love can be twisted into leverage. About how people walk away from their own blood and still expect to be first in line when the estate gets divided up. And now I had a choice. I could tell everyone. I could call Rachel and throw every word of the letter at her like a weapon, demanding repayment, demanding guilt, demanding that she finally face what she'd done. But instead, I sat back in my chair, folded the letter again, and stared at the ring. Because somewhere in all this mess, I had started to feel something else creeping in, something I hadn't expected. Pity. Not the soft kind that comes with sadness, but the hard-edged kind that feels like a knife. Because Rachel had taken everything she could from Grandma, and somehow, in the end, she'd still ended up with nothing. And me? I'd been given everything. Not the money, not the glory, but the truth. The real story. The part that mattered. So I made a decision. I was going to see her. Not to argue. Not to accuse. But to offer something she never expected from me. Because sometimes the best revenge is not winning. Sometimes it's letting the other person see just how much they lost. It was a Thursday afternoon, overcast and breezy in that way where it feels like the weather is trying to warn you of something, even if it doesn't know what. I picked the coffee shop carefully, not one of the loud, trendy ones Rachel loved where she could be seen by the right people in the right clothes, but a quiet place tucked between a failing dry cleaner and a flower shop that always seemed on the brink of closing. It had mismatched chairs and too much wood paneling, but the coffee was decent, and more importantly, no one there cared who we were. It felt like neutral ground, and that mattered more than I wanted to admit. I got there early, ordered a black coffee, and sat at a corner table with the kind of view that made it easy to see her coming, but hard for her to spot me first. I brought the box. Not the one with the real ring. That one was locked in a fireproof case back home, tucked next to Grandma's letters like they belonged together. What I brought instead was a replica I'd bought online, cheap and close enough to pass unless you really knew what you were looking for. It wasn't about tricking her. Not really. It was about giving her a choice without her knowing it was a choice. She showed up 15 minutes late, wearing oversized sunglasses and a tight ponytail, dressed like someone who might be on her way to a power lunch or just wanted the world to think she was. She spotted me immediately, hesitated for a fraction of a second, then walked over like she owned the building. "I can't believe you called me," she said as she slid into the chair across from me. Her voice was calm, but I could see the tension in her jaw, the twitch in her fingers as she pulled her phone from her purse and set it face down on the table like a challenge. "I didn't call," I said, holding her gaze. "I texted." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Whatever." We sat there in silence for a moment, the kind that stretches out and tests your nerve, until I reached into my bag and set the velvet box between us, not pushing it toward her, not claiming it either. I just let it sit there. She looked at it like it was a trap. "Seriously?" "It's yours," I said. "If you want it." The words hung there, weightless and sharp, and I saw something flicker behind her eyes, confusion first, then suspicion, then something I couldn't quite name. She reached out, fingertips brushing the box, but she didn't open it. Instead, she looked at me, really looked, and for the first time in a long time, I saw the girl we used to be, the one who used to share cereal boxes and sleepovers and whispered secrets late at night before everything got messy. "Why?" she asked, and there was no venom in her voice, only disbelief. "Because maybe this isn't about a ring," I said. "Maybe it's about what you do when someone offers you a second chance." She flinched at that, just barely, but I saw it. I knew she had read Grandma's letter in her own way, even if she hadn't held the paper. She'd heard the truth in that office. She'd felt the silence after it dropped. And maybe, just maybe, she was starting to feel the weight of what she'd thrown away. "I don't want your pity ring," she said finally, voice low and bitter. "You think this makes you better than me?" "No," I said and meant it. "I think it makes me done." I picked up the box and slipped it back into my bag. She didn't stop me. Didn't ask to see it again. Didn't reach for it. She just sat there, hands curled into fists in her lap, and stared at the spot where it had been like maybe she'd missed something too big to admit out loud. We didn't speak after that. I stood, left a $5 bill on the table, and walked out without looking back. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It wasn't anything like the movies make those moments seem. But it was final. It was clean. I drove home with the windows down and the radio off, the sound of the wind rushing through the car like some kind of baptism, and when I got home, I pulled out the real ring and slipped it onto my finger for the first time. It didn't feel like victory. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like closure. Like a line had been drawn, and I'd stepped over it. I put the ring back in the box, back in the drawer, back with the letters, where it belonged, not as a weapon or a trophy, but as a truth. A quiet, undeniable truth that no one could take from me. Sometimes justice doesn't need an audience. Just a quiet moment when the truth finally speaks louder than the lies. And maybe that's enough. Maybe it always was.